Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Real Science Exchange, the pubcast where leading scientists and industry professionals meet over a few drinks to discuss the latest ideas and trends in animal nutrition. My name is Scott Sorrell. I'm going to be your host here tonight, and I've got two co-hosts that's both from the UK. Okay, yeah, so we got Scotland and Wales. Yeah,
Yep.
all right, very well. Dr. Sean Richards, he's with Balchem, and he's our fairly new minted tech service person for the EMEA region. So, Sean, why don't you go ahead and just tell us a little bit about yourself?
Thanks, Scott. Sean Richards. Worked for Balchem as Ruminant Technical Services Manager for EMEA. Originally from, as you said earlier, from Wales, came from farming background, and I've spent approximately 30 years working in the animal feed industry for a number of commercial companies.
Great. And your first time at the pub, so welcome.
Welcome. Cheers.
Yeah, cheers. Another first timer, Maimie French. She's with Kite Nutrition. It's one of the largest, at least in my opinion, and most respected nutrition companies in Europe. And so thank you for joining us today.
Yeah, it's Kite Consulting.
Kite Consulting.
Yeah, so we have both business and technical consultants in the UK. One of the independent leading consultants in the UK. I'm a technical consultant specialising in nutrition, although from Scotland, based in the southwest of England. So quite a different climate down there compared to Scotland. But I deal with farmers in both the southwest of England and the southwest of Scotland. So a bit of a range.
And Jonas, you're in a different chair this time. No longer co-host. You've been elevated to color analyst.
There you go.
Yeah, thank you for joining us once again. For those that may have missed the previous podcast, would you mind telling us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, so I'm Jonas de Souza. I'm the Director of Research and Technical Services for Purdue Animal Nutrition. So Purdue is a US-based company. We are in the protein business, growing chickens, pork, beef, you name it. And on the animal nutrition side, we primarily specialize in supplements, protein and fatty acid supplements to both monogastric, but primarily ruminants, primarily dairy cows. So I'm native from Brazil. Moved to the US over 10 years ago to get my PhD. Did my PhD at Michigan State University, and then Purdue recruited me during my PhD, and I serve as a technical service at the beginning, and today I lead our technical team across the country.
Yeah, and Purdue, they sponsored the pre-conference symposia here at the Florida Ruminant Nutrition Symposium. Want to thank you for that, supporting the industry, and invited in several speakers, one of which was Dr. Alex Bach from Catalonia.
Correct.
And Alex is from ICREA in Catalonia, and he gave a presentation called The Role of Buffers and Alkalizers to Improve Rumen Function and Animal Performance. So why don't you just kind of start us off and kind of give us an outline of what your presentation was all about today?
Well, it was basically a review, or it was meant to be a thought-provoking presentation.
Good.
So I posed the question of, are we chasing a ghost when we chase rumen acidosis? So is it because you look at the literature, you always get incidents around 20%. So is that physiological, or is that something that prevents to have more cows like that? And so then I go along, and basically the conclusions is that the cows are smart, so they prevent rumen acidosis and they stop eating. So it is a problem because when the cows eat less, then they produce less milk.
Yeah.
Right. So then I elaborated about things that we could do to avoid this rumen acidosis, or to control it and prevent it. And one of the things was buffers and alkalizers. I explained the difference between these two. A buffer will make this rumen resistant or hesitant to change pH, whereas alkalizers will immediately increase the pH of the rumen.
Yeah. Some of the key takeaways, key points you wanted to make?
By comparing these two strategies, I talk about some other strategies as well, but by comparing these two, I like better magnesium oxide, which is an alkalinizer, over a buffer like sodium bicarbonate. Reason being, both are effective, but the sodium bicarbonate needs a larger amount. So we have to feed about 1% of dry matter. That's about 270 grams. Whereas you can do the same job or even better with magnesium oxide at the rate of maybe 60 or 70 grams.
Yeah.
So by feeding sodium bicarbonate, you have a direct cost of the additive that you're adding to the ration, plus an indirect cost, which results from the necessity of increasing the amount of protein and energy that you feed to the cows, because now a fraction of your ration or your total capacity of intake is reduced or substituted by just rocks, which do not provide energy or protein.
Yeah.
So, and it turns out that actually magnesium oxide, if it's of high quality, that means it's soluble.
Yeah.
Because if it is not soluble, it does nothing in the rumen and nothing to the animal either. It's more effective than sodium bicarbonate in many instances.
Okay. Is there a risk of maybe going too high with the alkalinizers?
There is a potential risk. There is always a risk when you go too high in anything, even with water. But any excess of magnesium will be excreted by the animal. It's true that if you feed a lot of magnesium, you may cause some scours or diarrhea. But beyond that, it's not a problem.
Yeah. Okay.
And you should really feed like in decent amounts, like 2% or maybe 1.5%, which you will not do.
Okay.
Hopefully.
Sean, you were at the presentation. What some of the key thoughts or takeaways you had there?
New research is changing everything we thought we knew about choline's impact on the cow and her calf, and top scientists have a lot to say about it. They are presenting new research that supports choline as a required nutrient to optimize milk production, choline as a required nutrient to support a healthy transition, choline as a required nutrient to improve calf health and growth, and choline as a required nutrient to increase colostrum quantity. This new research is solidifying choline's role as a required nutrient for essentially every cow, regardless of health status, milk production level, or body condition score. Learn more about the science that is changing the game and the choline source that is making it happen. Reassure precision-release choline from Balchem. Visit balchem.com/scientistsay to learn more.
I mean, first of all, great compliment to Alex. He did a fantastic job of, being thought-provoking. And, to me, I think it was, made me think, do we rush for sodium bicarbonate too soon? Should we be using mag oxide as a much more of a first-line defense? And what does it mean for our magnesium requirements? Should we be actually increasing magnesium requirements? Don't know your thoughts, Alex.
No, I like the way you phrase it. No, are we rushing for sodium bicarbonate or magnesium? I think we probably are rushing. So before I got into alkalizers and buffers, I also talk about other strategies. No, and probably the best strategy to avoid the use of these two is make a nice ration. So formulate a ration properly that there is no need for these additives. And a ration like that would be a ration that really is equilibrated or balanced in terms of starch amount and starch of rate of degradation of the starch. So these are the two main issues. But if you try to do that and whatever, you have constraints in the farm, you have the corn that you have the corn silage, and you got to use that, then I would rather first start with magnesium oxide and then go to sodium bicarbonate. And in most of the occasions, you will get the job done with only magnesium oxide, if it is of good quality. That's important.
How do you define the quality?
Right. For magnesium to be effective, it needs to be solubilized. That's a big difference from sodium bicarbonate. Sodium bicarbonate, it's very soluble, so it's active right away. Magnesium oxide will only be active when it's solubilized and it's converted into magnesium hydroxide. That's what does the trick. So there are many magnesium oxides that, due to their quality or their grinding size or their temperature of synthesis from the rocks, is not soluble at all. Or you really need to be at very, very low pH. I'm talking about 3 or 3.5 for that magnesium oxide to actually become soluble. So you have to be careful with the source of magnesium you use.
Is there a standard method for measuring magnesium solubility and
There are
a way to compare?
Yeah, there are several methods to do it. There is the vinegar method, which is the most common one, which is acetate. So you put you have a solution of acetic acid and you add a known amount of magnesium, and then you measure the change in pH. If the magnesium is soluble, pH will go up. So you can test different sources. The problem is that acetic acid is much more acidic than rumen pH. So it's you might have a good magnesium oxide that dissolves in acetic acid and does not dissolve in room pH because the pH is greater. So there are other methods that actually buffer that and use a greater room pH.
I'm going to say, to me, listening to it as a scientist, you would say you should be using pH 6 or...
Exactly. Yeah. And there is some buffer solutions or artificial rumen liquids that are used for that as well.
Alex, I was going to ask, obviously you didn't, in the data that you looked at, you didn't see benefit from using sodium bicarb, but in times of heat stress, for example, that would maybe be a typical solution that some people reach for to help with that kind of heat stress situation in terms of diet mitigations. Did you look at cows in a heat stress situation, and did you see a different response to sodium bicarb in those situations?
Yeah, I have not done that myself, so I have not done research firsthand on that. I don't know why you would use, though, sodium bicarbonate under heat stress, right? Cows, they will lose a lot of cations in heat stress, but basically potassium. So if you want to supplement with a cation, you would use potassium, but it's expensive. So potassium carbonate, people hesitate to use it because of the price. Then going back to a rumen acidosis, when there is heat stress, what is the first thing that the cows do? They eat less. So in my talk, I was saying that one of the main causes of rumen acidosis is the amount of starch that you put into the rumen. So cows are on heat stress, they tend to eat less. So ironically, they are in a lower risk of having rumen acidosis. Of course, then what we do, if the cow eats less, immediately we increase the energy density of the diet. And we do that by either reducing the forage or by increasing fat. So if we reduce forage, we're increasing artificially the amount of starch that we're providing because we increase the percentage of starch in the diet. And even though the intake goes down, the total multiplication leads to more starch. And that might cause some acidosis. But again, in that situation, magnesium oxide should be your friend.
Yeah.
In that situation, Alex, by replacing bicarb with magnesium oxide, you'll have an impact on the standard DCAD calculation. And I was very intrigued in your paper about, you referred to 2 or 3 different DCAD calculations. Which one should we be using when we're talking about rumen pH?
Right. Yeah, and that's a concern, right? If you remove sodium bicarbonate, and also that in heat stress situations, you might be short in cations, and cows really do benefit from having cations in their diet because that will have an effect on not only rumen pH, but also especially in blood pH, and also in the amount of water they drink and how much they urinate. DCAD tries to measure what's the effect of those ions in blood pH. And the initial proposal for DCAD equations was to consider the strong ions. So it would be potassium, sodium on the positive side, and then chlorine on the negative. Then later on, about 10 years later, sulfur was included in the equation. But you can extend that equation to other cations and ions. So you can include also magnesium and calcium or phosphates. I actually like the latter. So the one that has a whole picture of all the ions. But when you look at the literature, you have to be careful because depending on the number or the DCAD that you use, on the equation that you use to calculate that, you'll have tremendously different numbers, but like from 150 to 300 or 400 even. So it's very. So when you put data together and look at the literature, it's a bit complicated. You have to consider the equation they use.
That struck me when I listened to your presentation. That you were talking about using a more extended DCAD equation, but ingrained in my head is that lactating cows need 250 to 300 DCAD, but by the standard DCAD calculation, they're just using the 4 cations and anions, and I'm thinking I need to recalibrate myself to use the more extended equation.
Especially if you're going to use the strategy of removing sodium bicarbonate and substituting by magnesium oxide, I would invite you to do that. Because if you only use sodium, potassium, chlorine, and sulfur, you're not going to consider the effect of magnesium. And in the paper that I presented, that we did with comparing sodium bicarbonate and magnesium oxide, we calculated the 2 DCADs with or without magnesium, specifically for that. And one of the reasons why the cows did not go down in intake when we reduce DCAD when we remove sodium bicarbonate is basically because we added magnesium. And magnesium also increased DCAD. So the DCAD did not go down as much as we expected if you only consider sodium and disregard magnesium.
If we're using the more extended DCAD calculations, where should the target be for lactating cows?
Yeah, that's a very difficult question because it's not very well used, that equation, right? So, but in our study, we don't see negative effects in intake when you go down to 150 or even 147 DCAD when considering magnesium.
So perhaps I should put a figure in my head of an absolute minimum DCAB of 150.
Yeah. I try to avoid this. I know we all we like these percentages, these thresholds, these numbers, right? These lines that we don't want to cross. But I think biology, it never has a line. It's always, because it's multifactorial.
Yep.
So you can get along with a threshold that is a bit lower if the diet is somewhat different, right? So but yeah, it's nice to have a ballpark figure, but I would not call it
Yep.
a
No, I
definitive
love that
limit.
point. Great point. So.
Yeah. So, what percent of the dairy populations are using alkalizers versus a buffer?
I think the industry I think both are very common. I think it's very
Okay.
easy to find rations across the world that they have a combination of sodium bicarbonate and magnesium oxide.
Okay.
And the typical combination would be maybe 0.5% sodium bicarbonate and 0.3 magnesium oxide. That's quite common. I could argue that if you are in that situation, you can very safely remove sodium bicarbonate. I've done that many, many times. Whenever
Okay.
you're using sodium bicarbonate below 1%, take it out because the impact you have on rumen fermentation and rumen pH is very, very minor. You cannot appreciate it.
Yeah.
Whereas you can really appreciate the change in economics in the diet
Okay.
because it takes a considerable amount of space and that forces the cost of the ration to go high.
Jonas, not heard from you yet. What's some of as our color commentator, what's some of your takeaways from the discussion today?
No, I think discussion has been great around the DCAD. I think my experience from the field, at least, I think a lot of people don't remove the bicarb because it's like an insurance policy, right?
And they've been doing it for years,
Exactly,
Whatever.
right? I think Alex pointed out really well, most of the research done, it was in the late 80s, right? And on bicarb, and you kind of have these, just add 1% of bicarb and, call it a day, So, and that's, I think, the resistance that we face, when people start thinking about the whole bicarb and do I need or do I not, right? And thinking about like a consultant, right? He's feeding a pen of cows, and there is variability on that pen, and usually you're overcrowd, right? So you have the cows that laggard, the cows that will have. So I think that's what makes people, a little bit more hesitant on removing, and but. I do agree that that idea of removing, maybe if you have a 0.5%, is that gonna make a big difference, right? In the performance. But one of the points that I really like, Alex, on the DCAD was the when you look to the intake, and really look into that paper, that meta-analysis that looked at the relationship, that really, at normal DCAD levels, there's no effect on intake, right? It's really driven by those low DCAD points on that curve. So maybe you want to expand on that a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the problem. Every time we do regression analysis, even linear or curvilinear or quadratic, the best way to have a nice R square, to have a nice relationship, is to go to very large extremes, right? So if you're asking the question, is DCAD has an effect on intake, and you put -1,000 and 1,000, oh yes, it will have an effect. But under practical conditions, lactating cows will always get rations that are between 120 and maybe 600. That's where you should do the regression analysis. So that's what I tried to illustrate in the graph that I was showing, because in the meta-analysis they had negative values, which you will never have or almost never have on a lactating diet. And if you remove those points, you come up with a straight line. So there is no relationship between intake and DCAD between 160 all the way to 600.
Yeah, and I think brings to the point that, maybe between that 150 and 400, there's not a lot going on,
Right.
So
And we technical people, we really like the mode of action, and we say, no, bicarbonate is very important because the DCAD, because the sodium and the pH and blah, blah, blah. That is all fine. And then insurance policy that you were talking about is also fine. We have to ask the question, how much does it cost?
Yes,
So
is that
is
worth
that insurance policy profitable, sustainable, right? If you take into account the indirect cost, it's almost half a liter of milk or a liter of milk. So
Yeah, and then if you consider that, let's talk a little bit about economics, right? So if you use the USDA data, an average cow in the US, average farm will make $1 per cow per day, right? So if you're talking about 10 to 25 cents, that's a lot of money,
Yeah.
yeah, it's a lot of money.
It's a lot of money, Think about your investments. If you have a 10 to 25% return, that's pretty good return, right?
Mhm.
And it seems small, but considering, what the dairy economics is at the end, we're working with shrink margins today, right? And it can add up pretty quick.
You've also mentioned that people justify use sodium bicarbonate because of stocking density, that maybe it's overcrowded a little bit. And I would argue that that's one more reason why you should remove sodium bicarbonate, because now you have more space in your diet to properly feed these cows. Because
That's a good
you're,
point.
you're always working against yourself when you put sodium bicarbonate in there. That insurance policy costs you money, but it also costs you space that you could use to add extra energy to the cows and
It's energy and protein. Yeah. Make
Uh,
it time dense.
As we look at ever higher yielding cows, that saving of space is going to be more and more important.
Yeah.
To get more energy in there, and to get more amino acids in there, it's going to be absolutely key to minimise those fillers, for lack of a better word. And if we can concentrate to neutralisers, that has a positive benefit.
yeah, I would argue that most of the improvements we've done in milk production, a big proportion of that is genetics.
Mhm.
And
Yep.
genetic has been leading the way, and we nutritionists have been going after the genetics, feeding the cows properly to their potential, right? But when you look at the efficiency, we are in the law of negative marginal returns. So they're still positive, but every increase it's smaller, and that's because the genetics is not there. We have not been selecting our cows for efficiency. We just been selecting for
Output.
yield.
Yep.
So we need to change that. And nutritionally, we can do that a little bit, but we need the genetic team also work on that.
Just that genetic,
Yeah.
diet interaction, right?
Yeah.
The only comment I will make there, I think a little bit different. I joke with my friends on genetic. I said, we knew how to feed high producing cows. Now you're finally catching up us on the genetics, and that's why we're getting these great results, right? So they are the ones after us. So, but
Yeah, I give them the credit. I
semantics.
give them the credit.
Okay.
Just on that kind of efficiency topic and space in the ration, one of the other methods you mentioned in reduction of rumen acidosis was the live yeast story. Do you want to expand on that at all?
Yeah, it would be the whole section of probiotics. No, it would be yeast, it could be multicellular fungus, or it would be actually bacteria as well. No, so you have an array of options there, with very detailed mode of actions in vitro. Very, very detailed oxygen scavenging, improves fiber degradation, fostering of the growth of fibrolytic bacteria, competing for the starch with Staphylococcus aureus, plenty of mechanism of action. The problem with those in vitro systems is that they use a dose that when you extrapolate it to in vivo is like humongous. It's very, very big. So I have a big trouble with that. And then when you go in vivo, you see a lot of variance. So in some studies you have positive results, in some studies you have no results. Many reasons for that. I think one is the dose, the other one is the diet, and the other one is the live yeast or probiotic that you use. So I don't know how to handle that. It's a bit complicated. I have a method to see if the magnesium oxide is soluble. I don't have a method, easy method, to see if the yeast is going to do what I expect it to do.
Mhm.
So to me, it's a second array of weapons to fight rumen acidosis
Yeah.
because of the cost.
Yeah.
They're not cheap.
Yeah, not the cheapest.
And I don't have that consistency that it's making me invest on that buck without hesitating much.
So soluble magnesium oxide would be your number one
That would be
go-to.
my number one would be make a nice ration.
Yes.
Do your job as nutritionist.
Yeah.
And then if you have shortcomings because of whatever raw materials you have or whatever, then my first line of defense would be magnesium oxide.
So you've made a compelling case, at least to me, that you got to take a look at pulling some bicarb out and putting some magnesium oxide in. How long have you been making this case?
Many years.
Okay, and then what kind of pushback do you get?
Many.
Many, yeah, okay.
I have many arguments against it. Some of the journalists were saying, "Oh, I'm overcrowded. Oh, the heat stress. My butter fat will go down. My cow produces bicarbonate. That's natural. So
Yeah.
I'm just I'm helping the cow to produce more sodium bicarbonate." But when you try it, you realize that you can do it.
Okay, and do you get most of them to try it?
The ones I say one thing: the guys that try it, they stay with it. So
Okay.
they don't go back to adding sodium bicarbonate.
Yeah,
But there are guys that they just don't want to do it.
yeah, interesting. For the panel, any big topics that we've not covered yet that we probably ought to cover on this?
I was just going to ask a very UK-centric question in terms of diets and back on the kind of acidosis topic, but we're heavy users of grass silage, which in the UK tends to be low dry matter, high lactic acid, very degradable in the rumen. Difficult sometimes to get maybe the level of physically effective fiber, especially if you're limited on forage as well. And so in any data that you've looked at, Alex, or I know you have experience in the UK, would you have looked at that in terms of also specific measures to mitigate acidosis with buffers in that situation?
Yeah, it's a tricky one, and you see that also in New Zealand, in the Azores, in high pasture-based systems, where the ration is extremely wet. So there you have a different, I would call it type 2 acidosis, right? The type 1 would be you have an excess of fermentable carbohydrates in the rumen, there is a lot of acid being produced, and pH goes down. The type 2 would be you have a ration that shouldn't be acidotic, but it has so much water that now you're messing up with the equilibrium of CO2 in the rumen. So now every bite of feed that the cow consumes comes along with a whole bunch of water. And now you're making CO2 going into solution, and now you have carbonic acid being produced and lowers pH. So when you add water to a glass of water, in the presence of oxygen, pH will go up because you're diluting hydrogen ions. But in the rumen, it goes opposite because now you're diluting CO2. And now CO2 will go into carbonic acid and will reduce bicarbonate in the rumen, and your pH will go down. How do you fight against that? There you need sodium bicarbonate or magnesium oxide. That's the only way.
Does that mean we should be thinking about dry matter contents of diets?
Yes.
I think through my career, I've probably seen diets become wetter, because of sorting, and managing sorting. And I think what you're saying is, should we go drier again?
Yeah, like everything, right? You need your line of comfort there. But I like to see dry matters above 48% and up to 55%. That's where I feel comfortable. When you go below 48 to 45, 40% dry matter, you're gonna run into troubles like she was describing.
Oh, that's interesting because I would certainly say, in my career, I've seen average dry matters go from 45, 50 down to probably sub 40 now, in some parts of the world. And great point.
That's
Alex.
a challenge. That's a challenge.
Yeah.
It's also a challenge management of the cows. So typical thing, the cows get milk. What do they do first? They drink and they go to the feed bank. That would be the ideal scenario. I don't like the cows going out of the milking parlor, go into the feed bank, and then get water. Because now you have a rumen full of fresh feed with lots of starch. Now the cow is thirsty because after milking she wants to drink. She's eaten. Now she's going to drink lots of water, and then pH is going to go down.
That's an interesting one. How do you change that pattern?
Oh, just put water troughs at the exit of the milking parlor.
Oh.
And make sure the
Make
cows
them
stop.
drink first.
Drink
Exactly. Water first and feed later.
That's not common practice,
Right.
but it would be an interesting point.
It is a bit common in areas where it's hot. People do that at the exit of the parlors. But of course, people are in a hurry for the cows to get out of the parlor and go into their pens. So they don't want to put a lot of that because it slows down the process. But it's recommendable.
Great. Just changing direction a little bit, Alex. Going back in the literature, there used to be some recommendations on the ratio of sodium bicarbonate to magnesium oxide and 2-to-1, 3-to-1, those sort of things. And there were a number, maybe still is, commercial buffer products around that optimized those ratios. I think what you're saying is you just need mag-ox. Would that be a fair comment?
I would first start with magox, and then if you want to add sodium bicarbonate, you can do that. But the ratio to me is meaningless. You need those 0.4, 0.5, maybe 0.6% magnesium, and then 1% sodium bicarbonate. That's what the literature says. I mean, that's.
So yet again, Alex, you've drawn a line through my red line of ratios, which is great.
So you said 1%. So is there some sodium bicarbonate, or do you think that there's really not a need for it?
By sodium bicarbonate, you mean like free choice?
Well, in the diet.
Oh, in the diet.
Yeah.
Yeah, there is this.
There's a case.
Yeah, there is a case for it. Absolutely. If you're gonna use it at 1%, and you can use in rations like in the UK with lots of grass that you don't have a space problem for energy. Perhaps you could do that. So it depends on your situation. Magnesium oxide is not that cheap either. So sometimes, if your milk production, like in Azores, like in pasture-based animals producing 25 liters of milk with rumen acidosis because it's just pasture and lots of water, maybe sodium bicarbonate is a better option than magnesium oxide.
Mm-hmm. Is there any risk, Alex, of actually reducing sodium bicarbonate in saliva by not supplementing bicarb?
No, it's been funny because the amount of sodium bicarbonate in saliva was studied in the 70s and then zero, a desert. And now in 2023, there is one team from Switzerland, I believe it was, they studied again. And it really, what dictates bicarbonate concentration in saliva is the flow rate of saliva. So as the saliva flow rate increases, sodium bicarbonate content of saliva increases.
Okay. It's interesting.
But it's unaffected by whatever you feed in the diet.
All right. What I'll ask now is that let's just kind of come up with a couple key takeaways for the audience. Have each of you guys kind of think through a couple things you'd like them to know. And Maimie, if you don't mind, can I start with you?
Tonight's last call question is brought to you by Niasure Precision Release Niacin. Niacin is a proven vasodilator for heat stress reduction and a powerful antilipolytic agent for lowering high blood NEFA in transition cows. Protected with Balchem's proprietary encapsulation technology, you can be sure it is being delivered where and when your cows need it. Learn more at balchem.com/Niasure.
Yeah, I think my key take home is the mag oxide. It would probably not have been my first go-to buffer previously to hearing Alex's research, so I'm definitely going to take that to my herds back in the UK, although not forget about the sodium bicarb with my high-grass silage diets.
Yeah. Sean?
I think my take home, I thought was a great point about diet dry matter is have a look at some of the diet dry matters, see why we're going so wet and adding water. And I think also, have a look at some of the DCAD equations and perhaps, start looking at some of the more complicated ones rather than the basic ones and start considering that and therefore, utilizing the full effect of mag oxide and seeing if we can get somewhere with it. So keep moving the red lines.
Yeah, if I may add a comment on the DCAD though, it's a tricky one in the field because you will always use stable values. You will seldom analyze your diets for potassium and sodium, and if you do it, you'll do with NIR, and NIRs on minerals is what it is. Mm-hmm. So there is a lot of noise around DCAD. So but it's nice to look at it. But
Yep.
it's not a number that it's, oh, I'm missing 2 points.
No, but if you don't try and look at it,
Right. You have
if
to look at it. Absolutely.
You can't, if you can't look at it, you can't influence it and
Right.
be aware of it. So,
Yeah.
Good. Jonas.
Yeah, no, I think for me, building up, on the DCAD story, it's important consider, like what meta regression does, right? And what the points you really are talking about. So the graph that he shows is a really interesting to consider, what the range when you're putting a regression line and, being less scared of changing that DCAD number as well. I think is one of the key points, within normal range, I think that is not enough data that we can say you're gonna lose performance or you're gonna lose intake if you drop your DCAD. At the extreme levels, yes, 'cause that's what the regression does. So that will be my most in the main point to take from the presentation was DCAD is important, but I think you just mentioned these is especially if you're using NIR, I would be really careful of looking DCAD because NIR was not a technique designed to look at minerals. It's supposed to look at organic chemistry. So, and that is people looking at that and making inferences on the field and just should be careful, NIR great technology, for organic. If you're talking protein, if you're talking fatty acids, if you're talking fiber, I think can derive nice calibration in NIR. I would be really careful to do that with minerals for sure.
Dr. Bach.
I don't know. My take-home message would be focus on your ration. When you ration, you should ration based on what you can measure, and then you look the other things and take into consideration. But what really drives your ration should be what you can measure.
Yeah.
And then if that's well done, you're done. And if not, start using other tools: magnesium, sodium bicarbonate, acid bath, yeast, you name it.
Perfect. Yeah, excellent. You guys been a great panel. I appreciate you joining us today. It's been a good one. Dr. Bach, thank you. Jonas, thank you for bringing him along.
Mm-hmm.
To our local audience, thanks for stopping by again. We hope you learned something. We hope you had some fun, and we hope to see you next time here at the Real Science Exchange, where it's always happy hour, and you're always among friends.
We'd love to hear your comments or ideas for topics and guests. So please reach out via email to anh.marketing@balchem.com with any suggestions, and we'll work hard to add them to the schedule. Don't forget to leave a 5-star rating on your way out. You can request your Real Science Exchange t-shirt in just a few easy steps. Just like or subscribe to the Real Science Exchange and send us a screenshot along with your address and t-shirt size to anh.marketing@balchem.com. Balchem's Real Science Lecture Series of webinars continues with ruminant-focused topics on the first Tuesday of every month, monogastric-focused topics on the second Tuesday of each month, and quarterly topics for the companion animal segment. Visit balchem.com/realscience to see the latest schedule and to register for upcoming webinars.